because every time you're saying no, you're saying yes to something else. And in so many situations, you're saying yes to your own needs, your own wants, your own values.
Hi, and welcome to Lead Well.
Remember when I had my conversation with Dr. Simon Senner, the psychiatrist who is head of a recovery clinic who also treats burnout patients. When I asked him what were the therapies, what were the things that really patients had to learn so that they could return to their workplace, there were actually two things he mentioned. First, he said, people need to slow down. And the second thing, and I was pretty surprised by that, he said they need to learn the social skill of saying no. So I thought this is a great idea to talk about. Well, actually, what does it mean to say no? And why is it so hard for us to say no? Because I don't know about you, I often in my life have said yes when I really meant no. But let's look into it. So, what can you do? What helps us to be very firm, to actually stand by our needs and what we want and not to give in when, for example, when we are asked for a favor? There is one interesting thing I'm currently witnessing. I have a small, not a grandchild, but a grand nephew. And he's so sweet. And he is discovering his own personality and he's discovering how he can actually interact with people using his language. And of course, as so many children, he has discovered the word no, actually, nein. And he's really firm with it. So whenever there is something that he's not happy about, he's saying no. And this is when we want him to put on a specific piece of clothes that he doesn't want. So it's no. And if we want him to come in when he's playing outside, it's no. And he's pretty firm with it. So there is a lot that we could learn from those little children because he knows what he wants. He is really determined. Well, I have an opinion as a child as well. Our children have a lot of opinions. And he wants to see, well, he wants to also be respected for the opinion that he has. And of course, sometimes we need to start negotiations because if it's getting cold outside, he needs to put on a jacket. If it's getting dark, he needs to come in. So we start interacting and he is learning where can I say no really firmly and where do I need to maybe give in, maybe find a compromise. And I think it's so interesting because I experienced the very same thing when I'm working with people and their animals. Animals have an opinion as well. And so often we do not regard them, we do not pay attention to them. But if we do, we will hear them say no. And again, we have to negotiate with them. So, what is it that we can let them do? What is it that we don't want them to do? So, and as I said, also animals, they know pretty well what they want. Like if I go to the stable and I take out my mare Maggie, she knows that, oh, yes, the grass is green out there. She wants to go there. She wants to go eat. And so I have to let her know that not now. It's not the time. So we have to negotiate. We have to have a conversation. And that's what we want to have. If someone tells us no, we want to have that negotiation. By the way, when I used to deliver sales trainings, there was one saying that if, as a salesperson, your client says no, then the best thing to do is to rejoice because they are still engaged. You can still talk to them. Sometimes when you as a salesperson get a yes, This means leave me alone. I don't want to bother with you. But if you get a no, then you can start talking. You can start investigating, start finding out what is it that still is lacking for them to say yes. So it's another interesting way of looking at the word no. But now let me ask you that question. Do you still know what you want, just as this little 3-year-old child? Or as my mare Maggie? Are you listening to what you want? Or how often are you saying yes when you wanted to say no, when you wanted to say, okay, no, that's something I do not want to do. That's something I don't want to be involved in. When I look at it from the positive intelligence perspective, at this situation, very, very often there is a particular saboteur chiming in. So, for example, when I say yes to friends asking me out, for example, that is because my little saboteur pleaser kicks in and says, Christine, you don't want to lose their friendship. You want to be appreciated by them. You want to be loved by them. So, how about you just say yes? Because then you're part of them. And so I'm not really respectful of my own wants and needs that sometimes just want to stay home. And of course, there is a way of working through this, but there is also a shortcut, I think, because when you think about saying no, at the same time, you're saying yes to something else. And if you think about it, for every yes you're saying, you have to express a lot of no's. We talked about this analogy of going into the supermarket when you had to prioritize and make a selection, make your choice. You have to say yes to one thing. And at the same time, you're saying no to 1,000 things around you. And it's exactly the same in every situation you're saying no, because every time you're saying no, you're saying yes to something else. And in so many situations, you're saying yes to your own needs, your own wants, your own values that we talked about 2 episodes before. Now, I always find it hard to say no because I think that I am offending the other person. And there is one interesting little piece of insight or little piece of information that made it easier for me that I want to share with you right now. And this is from my work with the trust technique. So, with the animals again, isn't it great that we can draw so much from that work? So, in a conversation with James French, who together with his wife has built this methodology, the trust technique, we asked him, well, in the trust technique, we are respecting the animal's opinion and we want to give them a voice. We want them to express what they want so that we can listen. But in some situations, we have to say no, just as with little children and also with adults. Sometimes you just have to say no. So, how can we say no in a non offensive way? And I found that really, really interesting because what James said is, okay, if you are saying no, you want to always focus on the thing that happens instead. Just as we said, saying no is saying yes to something else. So if I take my mare Maggie out of the paddock and start walking around with her, and she wants to get down and have some grass, I just tell her, not now. Let's go for a walk. And I do that really, really gently. And I say, not now. And it's not a no. Initially, with my older horse, what I always did, I was really quick at changing energies. I was saying no. And then, okay, now you can do that. But what I observed is that when I was this firm, when I said this no in a really firm way, my mirror Geo at that time, she immediately got into confrontation. So it was like me saying no to her. She was like, oh, yes, I want to. So it was like an opposition reflex. She said, okay, if you say no, I want it. And I found out that if I'm saying no in a much gentler way, not now, maybe later, there is not this need to argue. There isn't the need to fight against each other. But we can focus on what the goal is. We can focus on what our purpose is. We can focus on what we want to do together instead. Now, maybe you want to think about when you're saying no the next time, how can you say that in such a way that you're not confronting the other? And usually you don't, because in so many situations, I have found out that when I say no, the other person couldn't care less, to be honest. It was just my imagination who told me I can't. Um, and there is another thing about saying no that I find interesting is that I have heard very insightful people say that if you're saying no, there is no need to provide a reason. So, for example, Byron Katie, and you might know her from the work. So, Byron Katie is very good at making sure that you're doing the things you want to do and you're not being impacted by your thoughts that much. And maybe we can have another episode on the work itself because it's a really powerful approach. And she is saying if you're saying no, then it's no, and you don't need to provide an additional explanation. And I've heard the same thing from my NLP trainers when I went through my NLP education. They said, well, you just say no and you practice to say no. And we did, and it was hard. I can tell you it didn't help that much, if I'm honest. But what you could do, and that actually has a scientific background. So you can provide a reason, and the reason doesn't even have to be meaningful. There is a study, and it's not about saying no, but I think the analogy is pretty close. There is a research from a scientist called Ellen Langer at the Harvard University. And of course, it's a psychological study, and she calls that a photocopier study. So they put up a study, an experiment where they have people waiting for um, copying machine. And of course, these days you wouldn't probably need that, but it happens every time I go grocery shopping. There is a queue, there is a line, and then there is one person who want to go in the front. And this study says that if that person just asked to be led to the front, in 60% of the cases, so 6 out of 10 people said, okay, you can go. But 4 said no. However, if that person provided a reason, so if that said, can I go to the front because I need to rush home, I have my children waiting at home, whatever, the number rose from 60% to 94%. And what's even more interesting, even if the reason was completely senseless, the person said in the photocopier study, they said, I want to go first because I need to make copies. Oh, yes, that's why you want to use a copy machine. Still, 93% of the people let them go. So providing a because meant that the ratio went from 60% to 93%. And I think there can be a pretty strong relationship or pretty strong analogy for saying no. I don't know about you, but I think that makes a lot of sense for me. That if I say no and I provide a reason, no, because, then I think based on that study, that the acceptance will be much higher. So, what is it that you have been saying yes to so far and want to say no to going forward? Think about it from another perspective yet. Every time you're saying yes to everyone else, you're saying no to yourself. So, how about you start saying no to others and say yes to yourself? Now, let's do a little exercise together. And this time it's a bit more complex than what we have been doing in the former episodes. So, for this exercise, make sure that you can stand somewhere, sit somewhere, be still. If you want to, you can close your eyes. You can put two fingertips together and start rubbing them against each other with attention so that you can feel the ridges on both fingertips. You can also start wiggling your toes. Put your full focus on your toes. And then listen to a sound that is farthest away from you. And listen to the sound that is closest to you. And now that you probably have calmed down a bit already, think about the next opportunity to say no. And think about the environment you will be in, the people, the person you will be with. And really imagine that scenery of saying no in this particular situation. And then you can take 2 deep breaths. And come back to the here and now. And you can do this exercise as often as you want. And by the way, you can also go back to previous episodes where you were saying no and would have wanted to say yes and actually switch them around. It's pretty fascinating what we can do. And so, whenever you want to practice for an upcoming decision or an upcoming situation where you anticipate that you will want to say no, you can use this little exercise. Use some of the PQ reps, as they are called, because you're training your muscle that is helping you relax, that is helping you command your mind, as Sir Sachamin puts it, or that helps you to actually, let loose of the saboteur, let loose of the pleaser saboteur that might be around, and really make that decision and say no from your authentic self. So that was it for today. Thank you very much. And may you always lead well yourself and others and say no whenever you need it. Thank you.
This was Lead Well. Now, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this episode? Please share in the comments below and do share the podcast with your friends and family, but only if you like it.